By 4:47 a.m., the entire 38th floor of the tower glowed against the dark Chicago skyline like a lonely lighthouse no one noticed anymore. Outside, snow drifted slowly across empty streets. Inside, Vivian Mercer sat alone in her office with a wool coat draped over her shoulders and a cup of tea that had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. The cleaning staff had already passed through twice. Neither dared interrupt her. On her desk sat a framed photograph of a little boy with uneven curls and a huge grin, missing one front tooth while clutching a science fair ribbon almost bigger than his chest. Her son, Noah, 9 years old. That photo mattered more to Vivian than the billions attached to her name. The media called her merciless. Financial magazines called her the Iron Widow of Wall Street. Employees whispered that she never slept. But nobody saw the truth behind the headlines. Nobody saw her microwaving frozen waffles at 1 o'clock a.m. because Noah refused to eat hospital food after chemotherapy treatments. Nobody saw her answering investor calls from pediatric waiting rooms while pretending not to panic every time a doctor took too long to return. Nobody knew she once sold her wedding ring to make payroll during the company's first year. Or that she spent 2 winters sleeping in the office because she couldn't afford both rent and Noah's medication. People thought discipline came naturally to her. It didn't. It came from terror. The terror of losing everything again. At exactly 5 o'clock a.m., Vivian had scheduled a private leadership meeting with 7 senior executives. The topic wasn't revenue, it wasn't expansion, it wasn't shareholders, it was layoffs. 3 days earlier, one executive had suggested eliminating over 400 warehouse employees to preserve executive incentive packages before the annual board review. The presentation had been polished. Graphs, forecasts, percentages. Not one slide showed the faces of the people who would lose their health insurance. Not one mentioned children. Not one mentioned rent. Vivian remembered sitting there silently while they spoke about human beings like damaged inventory. She had watched carefully, who smiled, who nodded, who stayed quiet, who looked relieved. That was why this meeting existed. At 4:59 a.m., the conference room remained empty. Vivian glanced once at the long, polished table. 7 untouched glasses of water. 7 leather chairs, no executives, no messages, no apologies, only silence. A minute later, her assistant entered carefully, almost nervously. They said the meeting time was aggressive, she said softly. They're still on the way. Vivian didn't answer immediately. Aggressive. The word sat heavily in her chest. Years ago, she had worked overnight shifts at a grocery warehouse while Noah slept on a folded blanket in the manager's office because she couldn't afford childcare. Back then, exhaustion wasn't an inconvenience. It was survival. People with money called things too early because they had never lived a life where being late could cost you everything. At 5:08, the executives finally arrived, laughing, carrying expensive coffee cups. One of them was still scrolling through vacation photos on her phone. Another loosened his scarf and chuckled. Vivian, you know the city practically freezes before sunrise. A second executive smirked. You've always been terrifyingly punctual. Nobody noticed the expression on Vivian's face. Nobody realized the meeting had already ended before they walked in. Vivian slowly closed the notebook in front of her. The sound echoed harder than it should have. Then she looked at each of them one by one, and finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse. I asked you here at 5 because I wanted to discuss accountability. The room immediately settled. Instead, she continued, you demonstrated exactly why this company is forgetting who built it. A few executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, Daniel Harper, leaned back in his chair with forced calm. Vivian, respectfully, were 8 minutes late. She stared at him for several seconds, then stood, slowly. She walked toward the massive windows overlooking the snowy city below. When Noah was 6, she said softly, his heart stopped for 43 seconds during a treatment complication. Nobody moved, nobody even touched their coffee. Vivian kept her eyes on the storm outside. The nurse told me the specialist arrived 8 minutes later than expected because of traffic. Her voice didn't crack, that made it more painful. I remember sitting beside my son afterward thinking how strange time becomes when someone you love is suffering. She finally turned around. To one person, 8 minutes is nothing. Her eyes landed directly on Daniel. To another person, it becomes a memory they never escape. The room had gone completely still now. You think this meeting is about punctuality, she continued. It isn't. She walked slowly back toward the table. It's about character. Her gaze hardened. It's about who people become once they're rich enough to stop remembering fear. Nobody interrupted her. Because deep down, every person in that room knew she was right. Vivian picked up a folder and dropped it onto the table. Then another, and another. I reviewed every executive compensation package last night. Several faces immediately changed. Effective today, all senior bonuses are suspended indefinitely. One executive blinked in disbelief. You can't be serious. Vivian ignored him. The warehouse layoffs are canceled. The silence became suffocating. Instead, she said, Executive salaries will be reduced to fund employee health care coverage, childcare assistance, and winter emergency relief for hourly staff. A woman near the end of the table finally spoke. This will upset investors. No, Vivian replied calmly. Greed upsets investors, humanity scares executives. Nobody knew where to look anymore. For years, they had viewed Vivian Mercer as a machine. A billionaire who demanded impossible standards because success had always protected her from ordinary problems. But they were finally seeing the truth. Her discipline wasn't born from privilege. It was built from memories she could never afford to forget. Memories of choosing between medicine and electricity, of pretending to eat dinner so her son could have the last portion, of crying silently in public bathrooms so Noah wouldn't see her afraid. Vivian placed both hands on the conference table and looked directly at every person in the room. I built this company beside people who arrived early because failure had consequences. Her voice lowered. Single mothers, immigrants, night workers, people who skipped meals quietly, people who showed up sick because they couldn't lose a paycheck. The snow outside thickened against the windows. And if leadership becomes too comfortable to respect those people, she said, then leadership becomes the very thing I promised myself I would never become. Nobody spoke after that. Because for the first time since joining the company, the executives understood something deeply unsettling. Vivian Mercer wasn't furious that they arrived late. She was heartbroken that they no longer understood how hard ordinary people fight just to survive another day.